divisions in our society and are further shaped by our experiences with those divisions. So much of what I do as a teacher is examine the problems that arise as a result of this. In fact, much of sociology focuses on these problems that exist in society and what causes them in the first place, which means that much of sociology, the content of it, can be very depressing. Our students know that very well. That's one of the things that's very difficult about sociology. I hear it all the way from intro class to the senior seminar. Oh my gosh, when are we going to get to trying to solve the problems that we've been studying for 4 years? For example, when I last taught my Cultures of Violence course, Rosie will be very familiar with this. She was in that class last fall. Students by the end of the semester are really feeling the weight of all of this serious, heavy, depressing kind of material and information about violence in the world and all these problems that exist and how they're created, and they seem insurmountable as a result. So by popular demand at the end of the semester, we spent some time before class one day watching a stand-up comedian on YouTube, just so that we could laugh together again and relieve ourselves of the burden of all of that serious and important information, even if just for a few minutes. One sociologist, and a very pessimistic one at that, Max Weber, was once asked why he continued to study sociology if it's so depressing. And his response was, I want to see how much I can take. Of course, he later spent several months in an insane asylum. In keeping with this focus on the problems in society, much sociological research has been done on patterns of friendship and the negative impact of differences like race, gender, and so on those patterns. Statistically, it turns out that diverse friendships are still pretty rare, despite all of the seeming progress that we've made in our society, and a lot of attention from sociologists has been devoted to explaining why that's the case. What's going on in our society that causes these divisions, even in our friendships? However, I sought to break out of this pattern of focusing on problems and instead decided I'd like to focus on the success stories, rare as they might be. Indeed, as I say at the end of the first chapter in the book, I'm more intrigued by those friendships that go against the norm, the friendships that are more rare, the unlikely friendships where socially constructed boundaries apparently have not posed an impediment to the development of a close relationship. While these friendships are exceptional, I believe we have a lot to learn from them. They embody the ideals of a world in which a diverse population can live and work together, not just in spite of their differences, but actually drawing inspiration and strength from those differences when forging the social bonds that are essential to a healthy community and society. In other words, these friendships that cross social boundaries have the potential to decrease the misunderstandings between diverse groups of people and significantly move us along the path toward healing the corresponding divisions within society that shape our attitudes and behavior with regard to those who are different from ourselves. So with that context in mind, I'd like to read a section from my book having to do with the power of perceptions. Perception. Past experiences play a significant role in shaping one's perception of the other group and one's perception of the gap, if any, between the two socially constructed categories. How do the individuals perceive the social category difference between them? How might the relevance of that difference change over time? The relevance of perception is very well represented in a particular scene in the popular movie, The Matrix. In this scene, the main character, Neo, is watching a boy sitting cross-legged on the floor and gazing intently at the spoon he holds in his hand. As the boy focuses on the spoon, it dips, bends, twists, and then snaps back into place when the boy turns his attention to Neo. He then holds out the spoon for Neo to take. Neo accepts the spoon and examines it, as if to see if it's a normal spoon. As Neo inspects it, the boy says, "Do not try and bend the spoon. That's impossible. Instead, only try to realize the truth." Neo, looking the boy in the eyes, asks, "What truth?" "There is no spoon." Neo looks back at the spoon. "There is no spoon." The boy replies, then you'll see that it is not the spoon that bends. It is only yourself. Neil holds out the spoon and tries to focus, tilting his head slightly as he does so. He sees his reflection on the surface of the spoon. A moment later, the spoon dips and bends in the same direction as his head, his reflection bending as well. When his concentration is interrupted, the spoon snaps back and he returns the spoon to the boy. This scene brilliantly captures the idea that the way we look at an object, whether a spoon or a socially constructed boundary, such as race, gender, or sexual orientation, how we see it and perceive it is largely dependent on our own cognitive understanding of it. The relevance of social categories has nothing to do with our ability to objectively measure the differences. Instead, it is our own inner subjective perception of it that matters. Still, there's a danger in looking beyond those socially constructed differences between diverse groups of people. As the poet, activist, and feminist Audre Lorde observes, quote, "Too often we pour the energy needed for recognizing and exploring differences into pretending those differences are insurmountable barriers or that they do not exist at all. This results in voluntary isolation or false and treacherous connections." End quote. Clearly, this is a question of balance. It's possible to go too far in either direction, assuming that the differences between groups are dominant, resulting in a situation in which those from different groups are seen as nothing more than a member of that group, or assuming that there are no differences in the individual experience whatsoever arising out of membership within a particular group. The latter extreme, where important experiential differences between groups are wiped out and ignored as if they are not relevant, results in a harmful form of color blindness when applied to race. The idea of color blindness reflects the neoconservative belief that if we simply not see race, we could recognize our sameness and the problems associated with racism would disappear. Some liberals have also begun to feel this way, believing that if we act as if race does not matter, it will not matter. This position, however, ignores the very real impact of race in privileging some and marginalizing others. Sociologist Kathleen Corrigan puts it this way, quote, "Research indicates that race, while a social construction, is still a powerful force at all levels of U.S. society and not a force to be ignored. Colorblind attitudes may help some individuals develop and maintain friendships across the racial divide, yet they do nothing to diminish the divide itself. In order to reduce the racial divide, we must first be able to see it clearly." End quote. Race and all demographic differences is very much like the spoon in the matrix. We need to recognize that it is a social construction that is still manifest in our social world with very real consequences for everyone, regardless of racial identity. At the same time, how we see and perceive it is dependent on our understanding of it. It is a mistake to be overly concerned with differences between groups, just as it is a mistake to be dismissive of any differences. In other words, it's best to recognize the very historical differences and opportunities that exist between groups, but to not let them get in the way of establishing close relational ties with diverse others. This is a very delicate and difficult balance to maintain. The focus of the interviews required that I bring